Presented by Old National Bank. Great to have you with us, Dave Revson and Andy Katz. It's an emotional night in East Lansing and a really impressive performance from the Spartans.
Yeah, look, we had no idea how they were going to handle this. The first game at Michigan was incredibly difficult for them. It was so soon after. The first athletic competition for the men's basketball team, the women's basketball team obviously played at home that day. And clearly at the beginning, you could tell that everything was weighing heavy on them.
Yes.
They didn't play well at the beginning, and that's fine. But they started getting going, started making shots. And then once Tyson Walker was making threes and the crowd got into it, I thought it was over. I thought there was no way Indiana was going to win this game because that tidal wave of emotion had swept up the Spartans, and they were playing as well in that stretch as I've seen them all year.
That's what's crazy about it. There was one lead change in the game, right? I mean, right. Indiana looked great at the outset, and then Michigan State just poured it on. That is today's big story. It didn't start well for the Spartans, to Andy's point. Indiana led 8-0. MSU was down about 12 minutes in, and then it just turned from there. They outscored Indiana by 24 in the final 26 minutes, hit 9 of their last 14 threes. First time as Spartans have both Tyson Walker and A.J. Hoggard surpassed the 20-point mark, 80-65, just a huge emotional win for Tom Izzo's team, and you could see the emotions there written all over his face. And I do think, kind of to your earlier point, and certainly the visuals would bear it out, everything we saw last night, emotions were a really big part of it, but Michigan State played really well in the last 28 minutes of this game, and you can ride emotions, and again, I'm not in any way minimizing that, but if Michigan State can somehow harness this, man, they'll be really tough here down the stretch.
Yeah, there's no question that Tyson Walker is the key to their team. We think about how guards can win you games in postseason, whether it's conference tournament or NCAA tournament. And it's really amazing when you think in this league of guys that have stepped up a level, how, especially the second year, the exception might be Jameer Young. This is his first year from Charlotte to Maryland. But, Jalen Pickett from Siena to Penn State, big-time shot maker now. Tyson Walker, Northeastern to Michigan State. And I would put him up against any guard in the country right now in terms of game on the line, go get me a bucket. And that's a difference maker for them. A.J. Hoggard, used to be sort of a turnover waiting to happen. That's settled down. He made big-time plays. And I do think Joey Hauser plays better when all the pressure is not on him. Mm-hmm. Be that spot shooter, make some plays when it's open for him. And Walker and Hoggard allow him to do that. And I think that you can see he plays a little bit looser when the weight of the world is not on him.
The guards were clearly the story, though, to your point. Both of them going over 20 points, as I mentioned. And you have that discussion about where they stand among the Big Ten's best backcourts. They play like that. They are certainly in that conversation. I thought there were some, I don't want to say overlooked performances, but the 5 spot has not been great for them this year. And Amadi Sissoko had 1 basket in the game. It was a great one.
Yes.
Beautiful alley-oop. Jackson Kohler came in and had some nice moments inside. But it really wasn't so much about the offense. It was kind of the job they did. They made Trace Jackson Davis work. They did a good job on the glass. I just felt like, again, they're not going to be able to. They're just not a team that's going to dump it down low and get too consistently in the paint. But the 5 spot helped them in a season where it hasn't always done that.
So I thought last night, tell me, you may disagree, I don't know, I thought there's some parallels, the way Kohler played and gave them energy, and Sissoko for the most part, but they stayed in their lane, similar to what Northwestern's gotten out of Nicholson and Titus Verhoeven, because those guys just have to do their role. Just rebound, defend, bring energy, don't commit fouls. If you get fouled, make your free throws. I think there's some similarities there in terms of those post positions. You're not going to ever dump it down into the post at Northwestern the same way you're not going to do it at Michigan State. If you can just maximize those positions and let your guards lead you or your big wings, you're going to have success.
So good win for Michigan State, 24th in their last 26 home games against Indiana. Let's talk about the Hoosiers here. Interested kind of what you saw from them. They pulled out a really good win over Illinois over the weekend, but previous to that, they had lost the game to Northwestern. To me, they looked a little tired in the second half, and I don't know if that's just a function of Michigan State was so energized by what was going on, and so in comparison, you look tired, but it just felt like they lost something, certainly on the defensive end in the second half.
Yes, although, I don't know. I think it's an impossible situation. I mean, you're doing the right thing. You're wearing the shooting shirts that say Spartan Strong. You're there to participate, and of course you want to win, but outside of your fan base, in your locker room, I don't know anyone else that wanted Indiana to win that basketball game because the emotions were so strong for Michigan State. You want them to feel good about something for those 2 hours. I think it's an impossible situation for the visiting team to be placed into. You have to play your part, and they did. And I'm not saying they laid down because they didn't, but I'm not worried about Indiana in the big picture. Yes, they've had some tight games at home that maybe shouldn't have been. I mean, Illinois almost beat them without Terrence Shannon. But I just still think when Indiana gets out of this, this Big Ten, where everyone knows who they are, there aren't many players like Trace Jackson-Davis. Jalen Hood-Schifino is one of the best freshman guards in the country. And the big if, is if they get Xavier Johnson in some form. We don't know how he'll be able to contribute. If he can contribute in any form in the postseason, that's another plus. I'm naive. I'm not as worried about them when they get outside the Big Ten.
That's fair. And I also think the game turned when Jalen Hood-Schifino went to the bench with 2 fouls. He's such an integral part of what they do. And to your point, if they do get Xavier Johnson here back at some point in some capacity, then that becomes a little bit less of an issue. I mean, it's going to be fascinating, depending on what the timing is, to see how you integrate him back into the lineup. But I guess my point is more so about they didn't get a whole lot out of the bench, got virtually 0 bench production. I think it was 6 bench points in the game. Again, I understand everything you're saying, that maybe it was a function of everything else that's going on around them and the energy that Michigan State was taking from the crowd. But it just felt like we've seen a few bad halves here from Indiana. Like the first half against Northwestern was bad. The first half against Illinois was bad. The second half here against Michigan State was bad. And that concerns me because you got to be ready to go 40 minutes. So
I will say this. I don't expect them to win at Mackey on Saturday, but if they play well, which they certainly can, they can win, of course. But, I mean, if that comes down to the last couple of possessions, that will tell me more than simply, whether or not they get the W. If they are right there to potentially win that game, I think that signals even more about the potential of this Indiana team because they're not expected to go in there and win and get a sweep.
No, they've struggled a lot on the road, as most teams in the Big Ten have. They're 4-7 now in true road games. They're, of course, 14-1 at home this year. Let's take a look at these teams going forward here. Let's start with Michigan State. Still unclear whether they're going to make up that game with Minnesota. As of now, 3 games left at Iowa and Nebraska, and then home against struggling Ohio State. They are part of a 6-way tie for 4th place right now in the Big Ten. Thoughts on Michigan State here going forward, Andy?
Not an easy schedule. Obviously, at Iowa is going to be incredibly difficult. Nebraska has proven to be a very tough out. I expect them to beat Ohio State because Ohio State has just completely, gone in the tank. I mean, I know they're trying, but at the same time, it's weird. That's a get-well game for them. Yeah. So it's going to be very difficult for them to, and if they do make up the Minnesota game, I think they'll go 2-2. They could go 3-1. You can't count out Nebraska. You can't count on that game. I think they are better than Nebraska, but Nebraska has proven to obviously be a worthy foe here the last couple of weeks. And look, anything they can get out of this group down the stretch, I think is a huge plus. We have said this so many times from this set. You've been covering the league forever. There's never a person you say, oh, is this the right person? But I think Tom Izzo, in this moment, I just feel like he's the right person to handle this more than a young coach, an inexperienced, if he retires in a couple of years or whatever. It just seems like he has met this moment, and there's no, as he said many times, there's no blueprint for this. He's trying as best as he can. He's being vulnerable. He's showing his emotions. He's going to try to get out of this group whatever he can at this time because they had this great win. It was emotional, but you know what? Today's a new day, and they're still going to have to be on campus, and they're still going to have to go through all these things. And so each day he's got to get them through this over the next couple of weeks and into the postseason. And it's not going to be easy. And I don't think there's any better person to handle it than Tom Izzo and for Michigan State.
I would agree. And he is in so many ways the face of the university. And that has become even that much more apparent here in the last week or so. And to your point,
he's the soul of it.
Yeah, he's handled it so incredibly well. We'll see whether his team right now, Mike, of course, he has them as an 8 seed, would love to play their way out of that dreaded 8-9 game. We'll see. Still, you forget about the Big Ten tournament, I think, sometimes, but there's certainly the chance there to make some noise in Chicago, and maybe you can play yourself up to a 7 or a 6. Let's look at the Hoosiers, and Andy was talking about, they go to West Lafayette on Saturday. The Boilers figure to have revenge on their minds. I'm not sure they'll be in a great mood to greet Indiana. And then they finish up with 2 home games. They face Iowa and Michigan. If they can figure out a way to go 2-1, they would be in a great position for a double bye in Chicago. We'll talk about those double byes coming up here in a moment, but what are you watching from Indiana down the stretch?
As I said, I think they will go 2-1. Iowa, again, has not proven to be a great road team. Certainly they can score with anyone. That was a turning point for Iowa when they were down 21 and flipped the script on Indiana.
Turning point of their season,
yes,
to me.
No question about
absolutely.
it. So Indiana's going to remember that. I think the crowd's going to be great for Assembly Hall. And again, for different reasons, what I was saying last night, where Indiana going to Michigan State, I don't see a way where TJD, sometimes those senior days, those last games can be overwhelming, but I think the roof's going to be blown off Assembly Hall in that last game against Michigan, rivalry game. They eked out that 1-point win the last time. There is no way, I don't see there's any way Michigan's going into Assembly Hall and winning that game against Indiana. I know. Someone's going to clip that. I know. But I think...
Never speak in absolutes on television. Haven't you learned that by now?
I've never learned that lesson. So I think they go 2-1.
Yeah.
And
it seems like the most realistic side.
But I think they're going to play well on Saturday. I do. Okay. Because I do think they match up well against Purdue, as we saw.
Right. So they're a 4 seed, not only in Mike's bracket, but they were a 4 seed, as we saw from the committee. If you can get one of those protected seeds, that would go a long way, particularly given some of the geographical advantages. Yes. They could end up with that. Obviously, it can be a very different NCAA tourney scenario than it was a season ago. Remember, Indiana, quite literally the last team to make it into the field last season. The latest Big Ten standings show just how heated the battle is for those double byes in Chicago. Remember, the top 4 get them. Purdue and Northwestern in the top 2 spots. After that, there are 7 teams with 7 conference losses. Indiana's 3rd right now by virtue of having 10 wins. Iowa wins the 6-way tiebreak for 4th. Trust us on that. And then a battle for the single byes as well. Wisconsin has the edge over Penn State by virtue of its sweep over the Nittany Lions. That is a tiebreak that even I can figure out. The 6-way tie I'm not going to deal with. I'm just going to trust us.
Don't sleep on Nebraska.
Yeah.
Tied in the win column.
No, absolutely. I know. They got to change.
Crazy with that.
It would be unbelievable. Fred Hoiberg's done an amazing job. Let's go to the top, though, and talk about the team's best position for the double byes. And Purdue is the most obvious one. What do you think of the Boilers here as we head down this stretch run? Yeah,
with only about 10% of the precincts reporting, I am going to project that Purdue will get the double bye.
This is bold, what you've done here.
Yes. Yeah. We're sourcing from all voters that Purdue will get the double bye based on their remaining schedule. I do not see them collapsing and losing it and sliding all the way down to 5th. So let's assume the Boilers get the double bye and the number 1 seed. They historically have done very well in the Big Ten tournament. Haven't always won it, but they have played for the title many times on that Sunday, and I think the same will be true at the United Center.
Interestingly, they've only been the 1 seed one time. It was 2017, and they lost their first game as the 1 seed. So we'll see whether or not, if they do indeed get it, and it feels like it has been trending in that direction for quite some time. We'll see whether or not they can buck that very small historic trend. Northwestern's in 2nd place. They have a really tough schedule here going forward. According to BartTorvik.com, it is the toughest remaining schedule in the Big Ten. They have 3 road games. The home game is against a Penn State team that figures to be desperate, that shoots the 3 really well. We know Northwestern at times doesn't defend the 3 well. Do you think Northwestern can hold on to one of those top 4 seeds?
Well, first of all, I feel good about it because they've got the 2-game lead. The fact they swept all 3 home games puts them in a great position. Yes, there's no question that they've got a difficult slate this week. They're at Illinois, at Maryland, and as you mentioned, next week it's home Penn State, and then at Rutgers. But they're playing well.
They are playing very well.
They're playing well. They scored 80 points on Iowa and gave up 60. I think they're more than capable of getting a sweep against Illinois. We don't know, Terrence Shannon, like what's going to happen with that group, how healthy they are and all that. They definitely could go down and win that game. To me, the hardest one's going to be at Maryland because Maryland is a completely different team at home. Yes, Penn State's going to be desperate, but I think they will win that game. And then I think it's a pick 'em at Rutgers. Usually I'd say, no way you're winning at Jersey Mike's, but Rutgers has already lost a couple games, including Nebraska at home. So Northwestern could be playing that day, potentially for a double bye, for second, who knows, maybe even for a share of first. So there's going to be a lot on the line on that Sunday.
Yeah, it's interesting to look at those 3 road games. The 3 teams that are playing on the road have lost a grand total of 6 home games this year. So to your point, it's not to say it can't be done. They're the only team to win in Indiana. They've been fabulous on the road this year. They're one of the few Big Ten teams that can make that claim. It will be very challenging for them to see whether or not they can get it done, but also 2-game lead in the loss column. And when you look at some of the head-to-head stuff, right? I mean, for instance, Indiana, for all intents and purposes, they have a 3-game lead against them because they have swept the Hoosiers. They've done really well against the teams in their neighborhood.
Yeah,
and so if it comes down, right, if it comes down to the tie break.
Which one do you think is going to be the easiest to get of the 3 road games?
I don't know. I suppose Rutgers, right? I mean, just because it'll probably be a very low-scoring affair. So you see, but I
won't be shocked if they win Thursday night in Champaign.
Interesting. Okay, who do you like next? So those are the top 2 right now. Next in that group, is it Indiana still for you?
Yes. Again, favorable is a loose term in terms of their schedule because they have one more road game at Purdue. Don't expect them to win that, but I think they'll win their 2 home games against Iowa and Michigan. So now you've distanced yourself, you would think, maybe tiebreaker-wise with Iowa, because then they would have at least the win over Purdue, even though they would have split with Iowa. And so I like their advantage, potential tiebreakers if they go 2-1 down the stretch.
Amazingly, it would be just their 3rd top 4 seed in the last 14 Big Ten tournaments. And Indiana, as people probably know, has never won the Big Ten tournament. They've only played in the championship game once, and it was more than 20 years ago.
And I will also say this. We don't know the timetable for Xavier Johnson, and we know Race Thompson's been hurt throughout the course of the last month or so. But not playing till Friday really could help them. Just every extra day they can get, is the more potential they maybe could become whole for that weekend in Chicago.
I do think that's going to be a tough balancing act as to how you get him back into the lineup. It's tough to make adjustments on the run, but he was such a key player down the stretch. I mean, you could argue late last year he was playing as well as any guard
defensively
in the Big Ten. He was just tremendous. He told us when we saw him in Bloomington that his hope was to come back, that he believed he was going to play again this year. So we'll see. Wasn't clear on a timetable, but we'll see whether or not he can get back in there. Okay, so those 3 are kind of the 3. I don't want to say the obvious ones because, frankly, I think anything after Purdue probably could happen at this point. This is where it gets tricky, though.
Yes.
This is where we're asking you to wade through that 6-way tie and come up with one team that you think emerges from it and gets the double bye.
So this is the team that I have more faith in, and that is, at this point, Maryland. I think Maryland has the ceiling. They've got the closer and Jameer Young. What I love about Maryland, is they've got Minnesota, at Ohio State, at Penn State, and Northwestern. So you've got winnable games, essentially. Penn State certainly will be desperate, but, we don't know where, you don't know which Penn State you're going to get. I mean, they literally could win out.
Yeah,
there's no question. They are more than capable of winning out. They haven't played as well on the road, but I like their schedule. I love the way they play at home, and certainly the way Jameer Young is leading them.
Second easiest schedule,
yes,
according to BartTorvik.com here, the rest of the way. And we've talked about it wasn't all that favorable at the beginning of the year. It's been very favorable here down the stretch. As you mentioned, Ohio State and Penn State on the road. They haven't been a great road team, but we'll see. I mean, again, I don't want to say it couldn't lay out better, but it lays out pretty well for
yes,
them to have a chance here to run through and win all of them and be the team that emerges from that tie. So let's take a look at the bracket, what it would look like were the Big Ten tournament to start today. And you see the 4 teams there at the bottom, Andy, and I think the Penn State one is really interesting to me. I mean, as you look at kind of that grouping of Wisconsin, Penn State, kind of trying to keep yourself out of that Wednesday game. How important do you think it is for those teams? Because when you're a bubble team, like, there's nothing good that can happen from playing Minnesota if you're Penn State. The only thing that can happen is either neutral or it's bad, were you to somehow lose the game. How important is it to stay out of that Wednesday game so that when you start playing games, those are games that can help you?
It's critical. I go back to, and I got to credit Kevin Pauga from Michigan State KPI, does so much scheduling for the Big Ten and all these other leagues as well. He told me something years ago, and I think it applies here as well, that your most important non-conference game in a non-conference tournament is the first one, because if you lose the first one, a lot of times you don't play tournament-type teams games 2 and 3. When you're in the first one, usually you are playing teams, whether you're in Maui, you name it, games 1, 2, and 3. This is another example. If Penn State can get out of that Wednesday game, they're going to be playing another bubble team. In that example, it's Wisconsin, Michigan kind of thing. Then Northwestern. If they beat Minnesota in that scenario, now you've got to go and beat Illinois just to get your first kind of potential, good game, good win, then to Indiana. So you leave yourself open to potentially losing a game and not getting anything out of the Big Ten tournament when you desperately need probably at least one, if not 2, quality wins.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do think that we're going to be in a scenario, and we were in it last year with Indiana, who we mentioned. They won 2 games in the Big Ten tournament. They needed to win them both to get in. I mean, when you're the last team in, they're sending you a pretty clear message that had you not won both of those games, you wouldn't get there. And I think we have a chance, and we're going to talk about the bubble teams coming up here a little bit later in the show, but I think we have a chance of having certainly 2 and maybe 3 teams that are trying to play their way in Chicago. And that's why that bracketing becomes so important for them, because you don't want to have to expend energy on games that don't help you.
Correct. I mean, you got to stay out of Wednesday.
Right.
And by the way, Nebraska on Wednesday, if that all holds, that's a dangerous first game.
Yes.
They could just knock you out and you're done.
Yeah, I think they're kind of getting into that territory. I think they've actually long since entered it as the team you absolutely don't want to play.
Right.
Here down the stretch, a team that is really clicking offensively. It is time for our big stat, brought to you by Old National Bank. The Maryland women pounded number 6 Iowa last night, 96-68 in College Park. Their 4th win over a top 10 team this season ties them with Indiana for the most in the nation. In Maryland history, only the 2006 national championship team has won more games against top 10 foes. They won 6. Gets us to our big interview with the woman who orchestrated that national championship and also orchestrated last night's win, head coach Brenda Frese. Coach, thanks for taking the time. Congratulations. That was a borderline awe-inspiring performance. How do you put into words what happened last night?
Indescribable, the perfect night when you just talk about, having your defense and your offense clicking on both cylinders. I mean, that's where you're always looking to try to play that perfect game, but it really was when you talk about just our mindset and just coming back from the first time we played Iowa to, really being able to hold them from an offensive end, holding their big 2 between Clark and Cesano, and then having the offensive night that we had on the team. Just one that's going to rank up there, really special.
Let's talk about the defensive end of the court first, because in some ways I think that's the most eye-opening, just given what an explosive team they are. And you talk about the first meeting. I mean, Clark and Cesano combined for 70 points. The first time you guys met, they combined for 22 last night. You guys threw a lot of different stuff at Caitlin Clark, boxing one. You were all over her, denying her the ball, kind of face guarding her there. How different was the game plan? Was it a different game plan, or was it just a difference in execution?
I think it was definitely a different mindset and execution. You learn from the first time. Their crowd also had a big impact in that game, and I think we were more intentional, obviously, with Clark and the head of what she does on their offense. So can't say enough. I mean, leading the country in scoring at 88 points for us to hold them collectively to 68 points as a team, but definitely a shift in our mentality and really understanding what we wanted to get done.
So offensively, you were 4 of 31 from 3 in the previous 2 games. You went 14 of 26 last night. Explain that.
Go figure. This is basketball, and you just never know when it's going to line up. But I can't say enough for the team. Brenda Alexander, Lavender Briggs. I mean, they just had themselves a game. It was, the two of them have just continued to put their head down and work. So it was awesome to be able to see that kind of contributions off the bench. 43 points between the two of them, and I thought they were our X factor last night.
The Alexander had 5 made threes in the previous 9 games. She had 6 last night. It was interesting in one of the timeouts right before the fourth quarter started, and the microphone captures you. You're up 24. You're urging your team to empty the tank, and then I'm going to quote you here. You said, "We're nowhere near what they did to us down there." So you were up 24. They beat you by 14 in Iowa City. So you were not only close to what they did, you had exceeded what they did. But just give me a sense, like how important, I think coaches never admit that, hey, it's a little bit about revenge. And Coach DiNardo, who I work with in football, says every coach is thinking about revenge. You constantly talk about revenge. How much was it trying to right that kind of perceived wrong in your mind of how they dominated you there?
Yeah, well, I think, as players and coaches, we're all in it because we're competitive. And, it was very humbling for us when we went down there and got beat the way we did by 14 points. And who would have ever thought that it would be then 28 this time? But it says a lot about our team and their pride factor. Obviously, I'm from Iowa. I grew up there. So there's extra incentive, I guess. But at the end of the day, we all just love to compete. And I think that's where every time you line up as players and coaches, you want to give your best. And obviously, we were able to do that.
Right. It is an interesting story. I think people probably know by now you went to high school at Cedar Rapids, Washington, and obviously your formative years spent growing up in the state of Iowa. I know it's much more emotional when you go there and you have family and friends watching the game in Iowa City. But is there for you, each time you play them, do you kind of, in your mind, think, hey, this is Iowa, this is different?
For my family, they have to walk around and, after that game, especially when we were there. So they have to live it. So I think, just from our entire family, the village I have, the support, it is extra special. And, that's what makes these games so much fun. I have the utmost respect for what Lisa Bluter has done there and the team she always continues to put together. So great matchups both ways, and just we all enjoy competition.
I was talking about your quotes before the fourth quarter. I thought Brenda Alexander had an interesting one after the game. She said, "A lot of people have underestimated us as a team." It's interesting. I think about Ohio State at the beginning of the year, rising to number 2 in the country. They got a ton of hype. Obviously, Iowa has gotten incredible hype, and again, deservedly so because of how good they are, how fabulous Caitlin Clark is. Now you've got Indiana, they're number 2 in the country. They actually got a first place vote in the poll this week. Do you feel like, for as brilliant as this team has been this year, that people have overlooked Maryland?
I think they have. And rightly so, with just so many different names to the changes that we had within our roster, and only Diamond Miller coming back in the starting lineup. But I love how this team has approached it. It's kind of my mentality as well. You just put your head down and you go to work and you let your resume speak for itself. And, we had a lot of growing to do ourselves. We were nowhere near in November where we are here. Trending into March, and we have to continue to stay that way and stay grounded. We have another big game coming up here to finish Big Ten play with Ohio State. So hopefully people are watching, right? You watch the game and you look at the body of work that this team has put together, and you let the rest speak for itself.
I do think it's pretty interesting just based on that graphic that we just showed, and you were kind of alluding to it there, all the turnover that you had. You had 1 returning starter. This is a different time in college athletics. There's so much more coming and going than there used to be with the transfer portal. How much different is it, particularly on a team like yours where you've got 9 newcomers, to try to build a culture and an identity from the outset of a year with so many different pieces?
Yeah. It's really, really hard. And, you used to be able to kind of understand what your makeup of your team was going to be and be able to project in a 4-year span. And you can no longer do that. Again, I just can't say enough for, our staff and the recruiting we were able to do when we were looking at a roster at one point in the offseason of 8 players to be able to get back up to 13. And then, just the overhaul, when you think about your entire system, your culture, your identity, learning your system offensively and defensively, it all takes time. But, credit to these players for the buy-in and the trust that they believed.
Coach, it's pretty amazing. You've been ranked in 246 straight polls. Only UConn has a longer streak in the country. And as you talk about, you've been able to adapt to lots of different rosters, and you've had kind of, part of that goes back obviously to before the portal exploded in the way that it did. But to what do you attribute this level of consistency within your program?
I think it's all I know, having grown up in Iowa with 2 amazing parents and, all the way working into their 80s. And, I think just, again, there's no substitute for hard work. I think when you lead by example and you work hard every single day and something that you love to do, I think it's passed down. And, again, I can't say enough. I think consistency comes about through your work ethic and just continuing to understand what it takes every single day.
The conference is so good at the top, and we're going to head to Minneapolis next week, and we're talking about 5 of the top 16 teams now in the country in the Big Ten. This tournament should be fabulous. What are you most interested to see here as we head down the stretch?
Buckle up, because I think it's going to be wild in the Big Ten tournament. I also think NCAAs, I'm excited for our conference, so hopefully we're not having to beat each other up anymore. But I liken it to the year we won our national championship in 2006. We got to the Final Four, and there were 3 ACC teams at the time in the Final Four. And I would love to see nothing more than seeing as many Big Ten teams there, and just, the body of work that so many teams have done all season. That's why I think it'll be whoever wins this Big Ten tournament this year, rightly so, is going to have earned it.
Well, Coach, I know there's going to be a lot of excitement and maybe a little bit of anxiety heading into the Big Ten tournament. I want you to compare the anxiety level of the Big Ten tournament with the anxiety level of working with Red Panda like you did last week.
I'd much rather coach, but I had to make sure I got her dishes. And
yes, we're looking at her right here. All right, so take us through what's going through your head here.
Well, she said she was going to send them, but when they all dropped, that was, something like no other. I'd rather definitely more anxiety catching all those bowls with Red Panda than coaching in the tournament.
How much did you practice with her beforehand? Do you, how does that work? They don't just send you out there, do they?
It was talked through, and there was no practice of catching all of those bowls. I worked on tossing them up, but the ending was the hardest part.
So the catching is more anxiety provoking than the tossing? Because I would think the opposite.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like a Frisbee. So when you have single ones, those were easy. But when she had all 16 of them that you had to catch, that probably brought the most anxiety out.
All right, well, you did a fabulous job, Coach, as you did last night. So congratulations on both triumphs last night and the wonderful job you did with Red Panda. Thanks a lot for spending the time. I know obviously last night was a fun night, but a long night. Thank you so much for taking the time out to talk to me here. All right, great to talk to you, Coach. The Terps would be the 2 seed in the Big Ten tourney right now. The worst they could be is a 3, so they will avoid Indiana until the title game no matter what. The Hoosiers are locked in at the 1. Ohio State is locked in as the 4. Again, the tourney tips off a week from today. First 12 games here on the Big Ten Network. Mike Sikorsky's bracket yesterday had 8 Big Ten teams in, all of them in the top half of the bracket, with Purdue as a 1 seed, Indiana next as a 4. It's not unreasonable to think that the league could get as many as 10 in, given that Wisconsin and Penn State are among Mike's first 4 out. Badgers actually the first team out of the bracket. And so, with Andy back here, we're going to talk through the bubble teams. What stands out about Wisconsin's bubble candidacy?
Quick point on what you just said. I want to remind everyone every year, that the selection committee does not look at conference affiliation. So if 9 and 10 happen to be better than whatever, the 8th place ACC, they'll get in. So yes, it could happen if Wisconsin and Penn State or Michigan, end up being there. All right, so for the Badgers, for whatever reason, the metrics don't like Wisconsin. I mean, the net has them
terrible
78 prior to tonight's game, and I don't get it. I mean, they played a really good schedule, certainly down in Atlantis. 5 quad 1 wins, 5 and 6, so 11 quad 1 games, as you see on the screen there. The schedule remaining is a minefield because they got Iowa tonight at home, never easy. Beat them in overtime, but without Chris Murray. Then they got to go to Michigan, then home Purdue. I don't think they match up well with them. And then at Minnesota, you would think they would win that, but you never know. It's a road game. So this is going to be dicey to navigate. And then in the Big Ten tournament, it will depend who they face. Will they get a game that will help them or hurt them?
It's a team that was as high as number 14 in the polls. They played so many close games. It's remarkable to think. I mean, they had 16 games decided by 5 points or less. They have won 10 of them.
Yes.
But that is part of the metrics issue, right? Especially with the net and Ken Pom. A lot of it's about efficiency numbers. They're not necessarily the most efficient team out there, particularly the offensive efficiency numbers are the worst they've been in the Ken Pom era. So that explains the lower net, the lower efficiency numbers. But again, they've close games. They figure out a way to win them. What about Penn State trying to get in for the first time in a dozen years? As we saw from Mike, they are right there on the cusp, but clearly with some work to do.
I actually like their schedule, and I like their chances better than Wisconsin. 58 in the net for what that's worth. Only 2 quad 1 wins. They do have the sweep of Illinois. But here's what they got. At Ohio State, very winnable. Home Rutgers, yeah, they should be able to win that. At Northwestern will be very difficult. And home Maryland. I mean, there's a legitimate shot they could go 3-1 down the stretch, having momentum. They go 3-1, they're not playing on Wednesday. They're playing on Thursday. And then that gives them probably another quality game, 1 or 2, heading toward the tournament.
And again, if you go 3-1, that means that in those final 4 games, you have exceeded your quad 1 win total from the rest of the year combined.
Yes.
So you'd have 5 quad 1 wins, which is pretty representative. I mean, we're talking about North Carolina making the tournament. They have 0 quad 1 wins. So if you can figure out a way to get 5, you would feel pretty good. And I agree with you. Every single one of those games is winnable. They're all challenging.
Yes.
But this is the position that you want to be in. I'd make a different argument about Michigan. This is the position you want to be in if you're Michigan. Every single one of their games here coming up is a quad. Well, I think they have 3 quad 1s and a quad 2. But the quad 1s are all on the road. They're all really challenging. This is what they need. They need quality wins, but it just feels like, first of all, they're further behind the 8 ball than Wisconsin or Penn State is. And second of all, it's hard to imagine them going on a great run on the road, at least from where I sit. I don't know if you agree.
I do agree. And they've had multiple missed opportunities, notably the game against Indiana at home. They lost by 1, had a chance to win that game. But yeah, I mean, look at the remaining schedule. At Rutgers, home Wisconsin, at Illinois, at Indiana. Good chance, at best, they go 1-3. And if that happens, there's no way they're making it. If they are playing on Thursday, they're going to be, of these 3 teams, they're going to be the team that has to win, I think, multiple games. Like, get to Saturday and then see what shakes out around the country. I really feel like unless they go 3-1 versus 1-3 or 2-2 down the Final 4, they feel like a team that's got to get to Saturday in the Big Ten tournament to have a chance to get in.
And again, by definition, if you go 3-1, at least 2 of those are quad 1 wins, and at least one of them would be a quad 1 road win. So again, trying to reinforce that resume and see whether or not you can head to Chicago with a chance.
And if they get to Saturday, that means more than likely they at least have another quad 1 win on Friday.
Right, because that would be a top 50 neutral game. Absolutely. Let's break down those games tonight, starting with Iowa and Wisconsin. Iowa trying to bounce back, biggest margin of defeat all season against Northwestern on Sunday. They lost by 20, but this game is far bigger, I would argue, for Wisconsin. I mean, this is a game where if you don't win it, you're really in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, they desperately need to win this game. We keep saying must, and they have failed on these opportunities. We know in the Rutgers game, you saw it. So many opportunities at last possession. We counted, by the way, 4 different times Cliff Omori affected that last shot.
He was incredible
he
on
was
that possession.
Everywhere.
Yes.
Stretch Armstrong, Inspector Gadget. Anyway, they've got to win this game. Absolutely have to. But then for Iowa, how do they respond after the 20-point defeat? Offensively in the second half, they did not play well. They had some looks, but didn't play well. Wisconsin's going to have to ugly this up. They can't let Iowa get out in transition and make this a track meet because Wisconsin just can't score like that. We have not seen that from the Badgers to be able to score in the 80s.
And I'm not trying in any way to imply the game isn't important for Iowa, right? I mean, for Wisconsin, you're kind of getting into, to your point, like if you don't win this game, you're going to miss the tournament, or you're going to be in a tough spot for the tournament. And again, they've made it 22 out of 23 years. But we're talking about Iowa with the double bye. It's interesting to think about it because going into that Northwestern Iowa game on Sunday, I might have looked at it the same way you're talking about from Wisconsin's point of view, being from Northwestern's point of view of you can't win a game in the 80s and got to play. They play great defensively, but Northwestern scored in the 80s. They got 80, and it was Iowa who scored 60. So you wonder whether somehow Wisconsin can kind of replicate the defensive performance. They've been a very good defensive team this year. What about Maryland and Minnesota? We know how much the Gophers are struggling. It's a really difficult task to go into Maryland where no one has beaten them in Big Ten play this year. Minnesota is playing a little bit better, though, here.
Yeah, and actually the good news for the Gophers, they stayed on the road. From their game in Champaign with 25 inches or something like that due in the Twin Cities. They're staying on the road, went right from Champaign to College Park. So they've tucked away. Look, when they're healthy, they just never were, so we never could see them reach their potential. Obviously, they had the big win at the time over Ohio State. But for Maryland, they feed off the energy of the crowd. I'll be very interested to see, since this is not a big game, do the fans come out to the way they've have done in previous games? There's always an issue on start times in College Park. This is the earlier one. Will there be traffic and that whole thing? What kind of crowd will they get, early? But I like, obviously, the way Maryland plays at home. I think they've got the momentum. As we said early in the show, I think Maryland has the advantage to get one of those double byes.
This was a complete mismatch when they played in the Twin Cities. It was a game that Maryland won by 35
Their best road
points.
game.
It was their largest win in a conference road game since they beat Clemson by 40 in 1953. It was a long time ago. So we'll see whether or not they can replicate. Again, Dawson Garcia back at Minnesota's been more competitive.
Yes.
Last three losses by a combined 28 points. The previous three were a combined 90 points. So I'd say they've been significantly better. We'll see you again on Friday.
Yes, if you'll have me.
Done deal. Done deal. I'll see you tonight for the tip-off show.